This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with an old friend of Good Food Revolution, an old friend of me personally, Mr. Tom Pennachetti from Cave Spring, away out there in Niagara. How are you today, Tom?
I'm well, Jamie. Thank you for having me. It's nice to
Um,
see you again, and I'm glad that you're doing well through all of the pandemic.
yeah. It's been interesting times, that's for sure. Now, we'll get into the crux of the interview here. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted you at Cave Spring? And what was your first introduction to this pathogen?
My first introduction was back in early March, traveling. I was traveling in the northeastern U.S. and Tennessee, and it was starting to creep up in sort of on the radar in the news. And then I was sort of thrown into this. I was traveling in around the New York area, which was sort of turning into a bit of a hot spot. New Rochelle, if you remember, had gotten hit really early.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I was in that area, and that it started to register for me then. My wife had gone to Germany. My father-in-law has been ill for years over there. She went over there to be with him on a trip that she had planned in early March. And unfortunately, he passed away while she was there that week. So I got home from New Jersey and New York, and I immediately had to go to Germany for the funeral. And things were really starting to heat up then. He passed away, I think, on the 6th or 7th of March. And we came home on the 15th after the funeral. And Germany was at that time, it was very interesting. They appear to have been one of the most organized countries in fighting the pandemic and its effects. You wouldn't have noticed it there. It didn't seem as though they were paying that much attention to it, but they did have a lot of testing in place. But it was moving rapidly through the population there. And they live in a rural part of kind of central West Germany, the Mosel Valley. And a lot of people, we found out later, had COVID, that had been traveling in Italy and skiing and all of that, which is where a lot of in Europe, the center of it was. So I had this kind of blur for 3 weeks of traveling in areas where the COVID was present, but none of the protocols and health restrictions had come into play yet. So it was very much, for me, I felt as though I was in a bit of a snowstorm with all this stuff going around us. We did get out of Germany just in time, the day literally that it was closing down, at least the airports were. And we found out we had to quarantine, of course, for 2 weeks.
When you landed in Canada, was there anything at the airport?
Not really. They just asked us if we were feeling any symptoms, if we were symptomatic at all. And we said no, which was true. So it was a situation that was eerie. The airport was not very busy. We got home and quarantined, but we were right away here. Things shut down a few days after they had when we left from Germany. And so while we were quarantining at home, it hit us in our business in the winery that things were shutting down, and the US was shutting down, and everything was shutting down, and it was getting more and more serious. So so we were quarantining in the middle of that. And then it was a situation of constantly reacting. I think you didn't really have time, at least in our business, we didn't have time to sort of reflect on it. Again, I felt as though, I like the metaphor of being in a bit of a snowstorm, but I felt as though we had a good warm down jacket on, and we were going to be able to survive it, metaphorically. So it was just constantly reacting to new situations. What do you do? What do we do with our, the restrictions coming in on businesses being shut down? what do we qualify as? We qualify as a food processor under CFIA,
Right.
Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So we were fortunate. We're able to keep producing, bottling, in other words, which was what we were just getting into, bottling. We have to bottle because we have to clear our tanks for the upcoming harvest, which we're just in the middle of now. So we didn't have a choice, but we had to keep everybody healthy. We had to, if you lost people on the bottling line and in the cellars, they were going to be hard to replace,
Right.
almost impossible. Gabe DeMarco, our enologist, who his wife is a doctor. She's in the hospital, so he had to do a lot of testing, and at times he had to stay home for periods and waiting for her test results. At that time, test results were coming slowly. There were all these little things that added up that you're trying to figure out just to keep your doors open. And
did the whole issue of seasonal workers coming in for the pruning affect you at all?
That was a major, another big one. Thanks for reminding me about that. It all seems like distant history.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have not a lot, but we have a few seasonal workers who come in from Mexico. Most of the crew that comes in have been with us some of them have been with us for 25 or 30 years.
Oh.
And that was delayed, and that had ramifications in the vineyard. We had to make adjustments that normally we wouldn't have done. For example, given the shortage of labor that we had in the vineyard, we had to make the decision not to cultivate in our vineyards. We've been, for example, moving, slowly eliminating herbicides in our vineyards. We didn't have any labor. We had no choice. So we had to do a weed spray early in the season.
Yeah.
Things that we weren't planning to do, we had to do because there was no choice. And unforeseen ramifications. For example, not having cultivated, meaning, work the soil in the rows, meant that water doesn't penetrate as efficiently, and that oxygen doesn't get into the soil in the same way at certain points of the season. But most importantly, water doesn't penetrate, which meant that the drought conditions we had in July were exacerbated by that.
Of course.
And now we're realizing our crops are down, partly because of drought, partly because we had a little bit of a early winter frost, not significant, but significant enough that it caused a little bit of damage. And then the fact that things like not having cultivated didn't allow the water that we got in key times in the summer when we needed it, couldn't penetrate it, evaporated more quickly, and that affected the yields as well. All these unforeseen ramifications of changes we had to make early in the season. We're still living with that now.
How is the harvest looking?
It's been an excellent year. We work with really 5 key varieties for us that make up 95% of our production, and it's one of those years where all of them are rock solid, if not outstanding. It's like at the level of 2015, 2016. Just a really, really good year across the board. A little bit dry, as I mentioned earlier, which was exacerbated by some compromises you may have had to make during the season and how you cultivated, but not a drought that has reduced yields significantly, but not a drought that not as long as we have had some years in the past. Yeah.
So what are you talking about with regards to reduction in yields?
It's strange. It's kind of a perfect storm of a few things that have added up to a significant reduction. So I don't know about for everybody, but I gather that this is pretty common. People are down with vinifera anyway, in the range of about 30 to 50%.
Okay.
We're in the 40% range.
Right.
And looking back now, the combination of not having been able to cultivate and also, as I mentioned earlier, a mild but significant frost event that we had in the early winter in like late November You know, it maybe caused 10% bud damage in the vineyard. And I don't think we were as aware of that when we were pruning in the winter as we might have been. A small thing. The other small thing, not cultivating. The third thing, a drought, not a catastrophic drought, but a significant drought, mainly in July and into early August, late June into early August. We got some rain, but not enough. So the lack of rain, what rain we got evaporated because we hadn't cultivated. And at that point, we were into having to manage the canopy, and we had enough labor to manage the canopy, but we didn't really have enough labor to go back and cultivate. So that not cultivating the vine, the vineyard, the floor of the vineyard exacerbated the drought, and probably took us to a situation where the drought caused 30% reduction instead of a 20% or 15% reduction. If you hear what I'm saying.
So how did the pandemic affect your sales? Because you have always had very strong restaurant sales with your wines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you add it all up, our restaurant sales are at least about a third of our sales, and sometimes they push 40%. So that's a huge amount of our sales, and we had immediately a huge shift that happened at that same time that we were managing. What do we do with bottling? Can we stay open? Can we continue to bottle? Can we get glass in, corks, capsules, screw caps, things like that? Was the supply chain going to be in there to continue packaging our wines and bottling our wines? The sales shifted radically. The LCBO, it picked up. They were reacting, so they probably over ordered just to make sure they had enough wine. So we had a lot of shipments going to the LCBO, which was a good help. Restaurants quickly fell off to zero. How do we replace that? Well, the market sort of worked its way. People are still consuming wine still to now. It's just they're consuming it more at home. So our web sales took off.
Were you quite strong in your web market previous to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably about 10 to 15% of our retail sales overall. And that has shot up. It is now, I just got a bunch of numbers yesterday. I'd have to add it all up, but it's got to be 40% now.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah. 30-40% at least. And
did you rejig the portal, or did you already have
No, our website held up well. It's actually an old site, and I was a little bit worried at first, but it held up fine with the volume, which had gone through the roof. The biggest challenge was actually delivering the wine, finding the labor to deliver the wine, right? Because that was the last thing people wanted to do, was be out driving around delivering, because of course that, with community spread peaking in April, May, we were challenged that way. So it was all hands on deck, and everybody at the winery would hit the road and do deliveries. We managed to get our wines to our customers. We really worked hard on getting the wines to everybody within 2, maximum 3 days.
Wow.
And in order to sort of solidify our relationship with our customers and make sure that they knew that no matter what we were going to deliver, the old postal adage, right?
Yeah.
Rain, sleet, snow, no matter what. So that built loyalty, I think, with our customers. We needed that too. We needed them to be loyal to us in order to weather the storm of such a precipitous drop off in sales. Outside markets were dead too. The US, which was always our main export market, had been really, over the last year, picking up for us, closed completely. The West,
Quebec
has picked up because just because we've expanded our selection there. The restaurants fell off. Restaurants were more than half our sales there, with direct sales. They're sort of like the consignment system here in Ontario. and that fell out. But the SAQ, fortunately for us, we had just been um, we just had 4 or 5 wines that were about to be released in the SAQ specialty
Okay. Good
program,
timing.
and one in particular that was meant to be a continuous listing. So that helped a lot. And Quebec has been growing for us for a few years, and is really ramping up right now. So that helped. It's the only outside market in Canada that really was on an upswing at a time where we needed it.
We were speaking about hospitality there, restaurants. What are your hopes and fears for where that is going with the ongoing pandemic?
Honestly, I can't say I know. You know, my best guess, stepping back from the whole situation,
Mm,
when are things likely to be returning to some level of stability? Um, if a number of vaccines are available over the next, say by March or so of next year, and they get distributed, it's going to be the end of next year before they have an impact, I
yeah,
think. It's realistically early 2022, I think, before the hospitality business is going to have, I think, light at the end of the tunnel. That's a long time from right now. And
yeah.
I
I
know
mean, I worry about how many can hold on until then,
exactly.
because the independent operators that we know and love personally, our
Yeah.
friends, our loved ones who have establishments, I don't know if they can hold out for that
I
many.
honestly, it's going to be really, really difficult. A lot of them have, we all know they've transformed their businesses into takeout. They've done outdoor patios. Those are now going to be challenged by the cold.
Yeah, yeah,
People are trying to get heaters for outdoor patios. They can't even
yeah. But
buy heaters,
that
and that's
adds a
expensive.
whole new cost, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they have higher costs with physical distancing,
Yeah.
with the inability to have all the employees in at once that they can. So, and of course the capacity, they can only have about half the, or less than half the number of
Right.
patrons in, even if dining is allowed indoors, right? And I really fear that at some point over the next 3-4 months, that may end up being closed down. I hope not,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because restaurants have bounced back. We're back to having, I think in April we were down 98.5%. I'll never forget getting my sales
Yeah.
report at the end of April. Restaurant sales direct were down 98.5%. And boy, they've crept back to the point now where we're down about 40%.
Right.
So that's pretty remarkable. Restaurants that we know all these people, they're extremely resilient and industrious people, and they've made the best of a really bad situation. But there's no sector in the economy that's been hit harder.
The nightclub sector, possibly. That would be the only
Yeah.
one I can think of. What are your thoughts with regards to the way in which the provincial and the federal government have given support to business throughout
Yeah.
the pandemic?
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that earlier on, because it's been, I think, when we look south of the border, and even in the UK in the early going, I think our governments have done very well. I think the wage support helped a lot. We have an involvement with the import business as well through the Vine Agency,
Yes.
and that was hit really, really hard because it's even more dependent on restaurant. So the wage subsidies helped us a lot there. Fortunately for us at the winery end, we didn't need that level of support because our business, while down, was not down that much. So those programs helped a lot. And the most important thing in this kind of situation is to be able to keep your employees tied to your business through bad economic crises like that
Yeah,
this has
yeah.
turned into. And I think the CERB and all of the different support programs, both for businesses and for employees, that the federal government has enacted, I think they did a pretty solid job. Obviously, we're fortunate we have the fiscal room as a country, I think, to have done more borrowing than some countries can afford to do. So I have to tip my cap to the governments in that regard. Provincially, I think they did a pretty good job of being conservative on reopening. I didn't lament the fact that they took their time reopening.
Yep, I agree.
That was that would be my biggest was my biggest concern, because I didn't want to have it reopen. Sure, I wanted it to reopen so restaurants could start going again, but I knew that, or we knew, if you were following things, that wouldn't last long, and that the more disciplined we could be about delaying the reopening, the better. So I've been pretty happy. Yeah, we could get into a whole political discourse, but
We'll keep that for offline.
yeah, keeping it down to the crisis, I think Canada's done pretty well. I think we could be a lot stronger on testing and tracing. And I think the countries
I think we all could. I mean, the UK and the US are just out of control right now because we don't have a solid system in place there. Moving on to one other thing, your cellar door, how did that readjust with the reopening?
That's a great question. It changed radically. So right at the same time that the web took off, we basically closed our doors in our tasting room in Jordan, and we turned it into a curbside pickup and our coordination point for this massive uptick in offsite shipments that we had to do direct to customers in Ontario. So we had to package all these things for web sales and for phone orders that were ordinarily, as I said earlier, 10% of our business, and in retail shot up to 100% of our business was all either web orders or telephone direct purchases or curbside pickup. So we had to reorganize all of our retail staff became involved with this little micro supply chain internally of getting wines moved from the cases that they're placed in off the bottling line into shipping cases. Lots of different people going out in their cars, and we have one van, and we rented a second van at certain points, getting as many of our own vehicles out because the couriers were overwhelmed.
Yes,
so we had to do a lot. We have great courier partners, and my hat tips to all of them, but we couldn't rely on them for all of our deliveries at all. So we really had to make sure our Ottawa shipments were getting out. That's where we really still relied heavily on the couriers. So we made it all work, and it was a on the fly logistical adjustment game every day, things changing. Fortunately, we never we never lost anyone due to COVID. In terms of time down, we were so fortunate that way. Had that happened, it could have been a disaster.
Now, you had just opened a second tasting room up in the vineyards, right?
Yeah, so we've been working for a few years on a piece of property that we purchased at Cave Spring Vineyard. I think it's 5 years ago now. Had an old hip barn and a stable right beside each other. And long story short, we renovated those. It took years to get all the clearances from the Escarpment Commission because we're on the Niagara Escarpment. They're on the Beamsville bench. And the timing couldn't have been better. We completed that it was more or less ready to go by about May or so. And but things hadn't opened up yet. When things opened up slowly in I guess it was late May, early June, we got everything ready and had our launch. That the wine shop had opened, and things picked up very quickly. People were visiting wine country. I guess I'm going to say that's June. It's all of a blur now, but when people started coming down, they couldn't go anywhere else. They couldn't travel overseas. They couldn't travel to the US or other provinces.
I've heard this from a few people.
The wine country was busy. So our tasting room in Jordan at the winery was really busy. Plus we had still a lot of web sales, and then our new tasting room opened at the Vineyard. And quite apart from COVID, that was it's been something we wanted for a long time. We're named after the site where we grow the vast majority of our grapes. Yet we're located in this little village in Jordan, and it's kind of a nice European feel with the winery in the village. But people don't get to see our vineyard, and it really is. You've been there many times. It's one of the most impressive sites in the Niagara Peninsula, with a vista over Lake Ontario and this escarpment backdrop behind it that is really very unique in the area. And it's quite high in elevation, so the views are pretty spectacular. So we're really happy to be out there. People can now see where the wines are grown, and that's something that many wineries can take for granted, but we didn't when we started our winery back in the 80s.
Yeah.
The winery building there in Jordan was a convenient place to locate, and we did, but it meant that we were separated from our vineyard.
So Tom, I always like to end these interviews on a kind of happier note. As we've been speaking about all of these challenges that we've been going through, what is the most positive thing, something you have learned or gleaned or experienced throughout the time of the pandemic?
Oh, well, I think it's kind of a cliche at a higher, broader level. It would be just the way we have a great group of people at our winery. Most of our employees have been with us for double-digit years. It's like a family, and our team in the cellars and the vineyards and in the office, everybody really pulled together and worked together at a time where you, in a way, you couldn't be together, right? You had to be separated, but you had to coordinate. And that was very impressive. That was great to see. And we owe a lot to everybody in the organization for having, pulled together. And it was an emergency, right? You had to do a lot of things very differently and think intelligently in order to accomplish what you had to, what was easy to do in the past. It took a lot of brain power and organization. So again, we always are pinching ourselves with how great our employees are at the winery, which goes to the level of just people in that situation, and still ongoing, although it's more now the new normal. At the beginning, in the first 3-4 months, it was a scramble, and people react in different ways. And you see that people are people. Humanity is a diverse collection of individuals, and some people struggle with it more, and some people become strong through it all. And we're no different. We had the same thing with all of our employees and families. Some people struggled with it more. Some people were able to shut everything out and deal with it more. But on the whole, I think, like our society as a whole, that's kind of what I've seen, is that an ability to react and get the job done and keep moving forward. That's a very positive thing. I mean, on a business level, I think we've seen a maturation of interest in local wines. People are they're wanting to support local, and I've seen that now. We've been in business for 35 years as a winery, and nearing almost 50 now in the vineyards. And I've seen the slow movement toward local. And usually at times of economic depression or crisis, people do come to buy local more so. That's certainly true in the wine. We've seen that many times through a lot of cycles. But this time's different. I think people are coming down to Niagara wine country. I'm sure it's the same in Prince Edward County and Lake Erie North Shore. And I think they're kind of recognizing how important industries like ours are to the economy. It's true for the microbrewers too, I think, and the distillers. And they're trying to support us, and that helps a lot. But I think they're also in the process recognizing that the wines in the area have never been better, and the best producers are making. We've been doing it for 35 vintages now, and I honestly, every year that goes by, I'm more excited about the quality of our wines. So, and people are, because they're coming, they're seeing that. So that's a real positive as well.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Tom Pennachetti, thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. It's always a pleasure to catch up, whether it be on camera or offside.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Jamie. Thank you for having me. And yeah, last time we saw each other in person was just pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Wow, things have changed since that.
I think I actually mentioned that Riesling tasting. I wasn't hugging anyone because I said this could be the last time.
You did say
Yeah,
that.
I did.
You were prescient. You saw the future.
Yeah. Well, anyway, stay safe out there, Tom.
Thank you so much.
And we'll speak
Take care,
soon.
Jamie.